Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Unfound Now, the monthly series on YouTube where I go over recent disappearances. I've been doing this for over 3 years now. I don't know where the time goes. But on today's edition, I'll be looking at the disappearance of Andrew Griffin, who went missing from Shawnee, Oklahoma on June 30th, 2023. So over 2 months ago. I'm recording this on September 1st of 2023. He was on a trip in a company truck from Shawnee, Oklahoma to Odessa, Texas. And somewhere in between those two locations, he went missing. He and his truck are missing, and you will hear me read from an article in the middle of this video as I also look at a map of the area. I started Unfound in 2020 during the summer of 2020 for three particular reasons. One, publicity for recent disappearances. This gives me a chance to look at some disappearances that are not yet eligible for the regular podcast that comes out every Friday. Number two, from an analysis point of view, what do we see when we at Unfound look at disappearances that make it into news, very new ones within a few days, within a few weeks of the disappearance happening, gets into the news? How is that article written, and what can we learn from it? And number three, it's all about the learning here. So it's not just about analysis. What can we take from this disappearance and apply to other disappearances that have already been covered on Unfound Now or the regular podcast, or in the future? How do we take what we're learning now and bring it to future disappearances that will be covered? On that point, with every Unfound Now, I have learning points. Three theories, sometimes three just important topics that I think that can be applied to the disappearance that we're talking about in that particular video. So for this one, for the disappearance of Andrew Griffin, the three are: number one, when missing people speak; number two, missing people and their missing vehicles; and number three, when is a connection a connection? I want you to think about those three titles. I'll now go to the map where I will diagram the route that he's supposed to be taking. I'll read from an article, and then I will come back to this screen, me on camera, where I will go over those three learning points in much more depth. I'll be back in a moment. Okay, here is the map for the disappearance of Andrew Griffin, and I should note, if you're doing any Googling on this disappearance, you may find another Andrew Griffin who went missing in Oklahoma. That Andrew Griffin is not this Andrew Griffin. That Andrew Griffin went missing back in 2017 and is much, much younger then and now than this Andrew Griffin is. Just to make that clear, if you've done any searches for this disappearance, lots of Andrew Griffins in the United States. All right, so you are looking at this map, and I'm going to read an article that was written at the time. You should know there hasn't been a lot written regarding his disappearance. A few different articles, but they basically all say the same thing. So I'm just picking one of them out and going to read this as you look at this map. And I'll do a little diagramming as well. Andrew Griffin was traveling from Pottawatomie County, I probably messed that name up, to Odessa, Texas for work. His boss said he never showed up and hasn't been seen since. We got information that he possibly stayed the night at his grandpa's house, so one of our deputies went and made contact with his grandfather, said Travis Dinwiddie, the undersheriff in Pottawatomie County, which is up here in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Pottawatomie sheriffs identified that Andrew Griffin spent the night at his grandfather's home and left early the next morning on June 30th. That's the last contact we've had, says Dinwiddie. The sheriff's office said they filed a missing persons report after Griffin's family called multiple counties that wouldn't file a report. We haven't got any hints or anything for anybody having contact with him. Once again, this Undersheriff Dinwiddie said from Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma. The sheriff's office said Griffin was last seen driving a white 2023 Dodge Ram company vehicle, not his own vehicle, a company vehicle with a Texas plate reading SSK 5533. His boss had talked to him over the phone, and Andrew said, or the boss said, the last thing he said to me, Andrew said to me, was, "I'm crossing the river," and I'll get into that in a moment. So just assuming it was probably the Red River, over into Texas, said Dinwiddie, once again, the Undersheriff of Pottawatomie County. If you know anything on where Griffin might be, contact the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office at 405-273-1727. So where is this river? What could this river be? Keep in mind, as reading the article as it is written, Andrew did not say which river. He just said, "I'm crossing the river." Now, but they said, so assuming it was the Red River. So where is the Red River? Well, the Red River at this point forms the border between Oklahoma and Texas. This is the Red River right here, right in there. And once again, to zoom out to show you, just kind of keep your eye on that point. It's right there. So Shawnee, the river, and Odessa, Texas, way down here to the southwest. And you can see, as Google states it, the shortest drive would be 6 hours and 48 minutes from Shawnee to Odessa. Now, what we don't know is, and I'll get in more into this in the analysis, is at the end of this video, is how long had Andrew been doing this job? How far ahead of time did he know he had to be in Odessa? How long had he been in Oklahoma? This is all information. I tried to find it. Could not be found anywhere. That might give us a little more background about what was he doing in Oklahoma. Remember, he's driving a truck with a Texas license plate, so it seems the business that he was working for is situated in Texas, incorporated in Texas, licensed in Texas. So he's was he up in the Oklahoma just seeing family? What was he doing up there? We don't know. But that river, the Red River, is right there in this area. So if we are to believe that he said at the time of this call that he was crossing the Red River, he still had a ways to go to get to his final destination. So, and once again, to point this out to you, let's see if I can find it again. Here it is right here. Okay, so it's right here. Right there's the Red River. And I'll just zoom this out for you one time so we can see how far he was into his drive. I would say he was like 1/3. If this was the river he was talking about, if the river is right here, so that's 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So a little over 2 hours into his drive. He still had 4 hours to go if he was taking the most efficient direct route from Shawnee, Oklahoma to Odessa. But to be clear, there is nothing that really states that that was the river he was talking about. And I'll get more into this when we get back to the points of learning for this disappearance. Maybe we just have to doubt what Andrew was saying, period. But there's no proof. He did not say the Red River. He said he was crossing a river. Keep that in mind. So that is the map. And I will go back to being in front of all of you, and we'll get into the 3 points of learning for this disappearance, for this video, this Unfound Now, and then I'll do a little analysis at the end. Before I get into those 3 learning points, I want to remind you to support Unfound. Maybe go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. Being that you are watching this on YouTube, but maybe hit the subscribe button down there in the bottom right-hand corner, please. Hit the join button, which is below, or you can support what we do here at PayPal. Once again, if you find the content here at Unfound, either the regular podcast that comes out every Friday or anything that you see here on YouTube, if you think we're providing great content, find a way to support what we do. Also, join us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. You can email me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com, and we also have the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. All right, so let's get into those learning points, and I will be looking off to my left. I guess you're right. I do not do all of this off of the top of my head, believe it or not. The first learning point is when missing people speak. If there is nothing else that you take away from this video besides remembering the name Andrew Griffin, remembering the locations, the date. Other than that, if you don't take away anything else, please take away this. A lot of times, missing people don't tell the truth. Remember this, remember this, remember this. This is not to talk negatively of them. But one of the points I try to make in the regular podcast episodes, when I write my blog at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, when I conduct the think tank every Sunday evening on Patreon, is that it's very, very difficult to get into the mind of a missing person. It's much easier to get into the mind of somebody who might want to make that person disappear. Why? Because people, suspects who want to kill people, they're thinking of it in a very logical way. They're thinking, I want to do this and I want to get away with it. Much easier to get into their heads. Whereas missing people, you just don't know. Why? Because we're not there. We don't know if that person is drunk or high or having some sort of mental episode. We just don't know. So for Andrew's disappearance, yes, he said that he was driving over the river, not the Red River. He just said the river. That doesn't mean that was the truth. I realize many of his family and friends will want to believe that is the truth. But I'm here to tell you my experience over 300 disappearances now is a lot of times missing people lie for what they think are probably very good reasons. We can't understand it, but in that moment, they understand it, even if they may not totally understand what they are doing. Very common. Once again, if you don't remember anything else besides Andrew's name and the location and the date, remember that. From now on, when you hear about missing people making comments before going missing, well, I'm headed down the street, that doesn't mean it's the truth. And it's even more so if it's just a text or an email, something where nobody gets to hear that missing person's voice. Please remember that. I'm not here to paint any of these missing people in a shady light, but we're here to learn, and that means recognizing the reality of disappearances. That's just the reality. Like I said, we don't know what's going on in their heads. We don't know what was in Andrew's head that day. It very well may be that he fully intended on going to Odessa. And it very well may be that he went missing because he's in his truck, he's on that highway, a deer ran out in front of him and he swerved off the road, and he is deceased in that truck somewhere, and he just hasn't been found. It went over an embankment, down into the woods, down into a body of water, and he just hasn't been found yet. That happens. But there are a lot of other scenarios where he might not have been telling the truth. Now, why do I have so much experience in that area? Well, we've covered disappearances like this. We've covered at least 3 disappearances where people called to get picked up from either their work or a hospital or a bar, and when the ride showed up, the people were not there. So they wanted to be picked up, but they weren't there like 20 minutes later when their ride showed up. Those disappearances are Crystal Morrison. She was eventually found deceased. Deborah Bowman, that happened right here in Pinellas County where I live in Florida. And then Kevin Newen, I think that was from Indiana. They all called for rides, and when the ride showed up, they weren't there. So did they really want to be picked up? We don't know. David Schrader, disappearance out of Wisconsin. Also a well-known disappearance from that area of the country where he completely denied what he did the night before, even though there was proof that he did it. And then he went missing the next day. Evelyn Piper, before she went missing, she said that she was going to Israel to get married, even though she did not have a passport. People say things. And a couple disappearances that we've not covered on Unfound. One is solved, one is still unsolved. The one that is solved is Brandon Lawson. On the night of his disappearance, he called 911. His words were kind of slurred and everything, but what you hear is there was a shooting, and you got to get the cops out there. It sounded like something really, really crazy was going on, and his truck was abandoned. And it turned out, we now pretty much know that he walked off all on his own. He was not telling the truth. Now, he might have been under the effect of drugs, maybe meth or heroin or something. I think it was meth now that I think about it. And he was just not seeing reality for what it was. The other disappearance that we've not yet covered, where it seems a missing person was not telling the truth, was Brandon Swanson. He said that he was lost and that he had abandoned his car and he was walking along somewhere, and then he yelled out like a yelp, and he was never heard from again on the phone. The problem is that when they eventually found his car, the car was nowhere near where he said where he thought it was. So said he was in this particular location, and the car was found miles away, even though he said he had abandoned his car. These are all very good examples of why we should just not take missing people at their word. We look for other facts to support what they say, surely, but sometimes you end up finding facts to the contrary. Just keep that in mind when you think about Andrew's disappearance. Now, the issue we have, at least 2 months into this investigation, is we don't have any phone information at this point. No pinging. It very well may show that he was in the area of that river when he said that. Then we get some clarity. But none of that information is public right now. So do not take for granted that it is true. Point number 2, missing people and their missing vehicles. Most important point you have to understand here is people going missing with their vehicles and the person and the vehicle being missing for an extended period of time, let's say over a month, is very, very, very rare. And in fact, the disappearances that we've covered on Unfound, over 300 of them now, I think it's a nice cross-section, a lot of different demographics, different genders, different ethnicities, different ages, all across the spectrum. I think only 3% of the disappearances that we've covered had anything to do with vehicles also still being missing. Only 3%. Keep that in mind. I know the public may be getting an erroneous idea regarding this because of these YouTube videos with divers going down, finding cars with people in them. It gives this impression that, oh my gosh, so many people are going missing in their cars. It's just not. It's just factually, statistically, I should say, that's not the truth. I'm not saying these divers are lying. Certainly there are people in these cars, but it gives an idea it's like 50% of the time, when really it's only like 3% of the time. Keep that in mind as you think about Andrew's disappearance. I do keep stats on these things, by the way. I do, as a person who all he does is disappearances. My perception, though, and I've not done any study of this, but my perception as a person who's been doing this for 7 years is that the longer this goes on, the longer that Andrew and his truck go missing, so we're 2 months in now, the longer that goes, the more likelihood that the two of them eventually will be found together. And of course, what I mean is that he'll probably be found deceased. The longer this goes, where the truck and he are not found, the most likely outcome is they will be found together and he will be deceased. Whereas if the truck had already been found, let's say it was found sometime in July, and he was still missing, it would greatly raise the probability that Andrew was still alive out there somewhere. Maybe he had abandoned his life, ran off, something like that. Still, it would not be very good odds that he was still alive, but the odds would be much higher under those circumstances where the truck is found and he is missing than now with the truck and he still missing 2 months into this. So you may be wondering, so what period are we in now? Right now, we are still in a period, I think, where it's most likely that the truck will be found and Andrew will not be with it. But like I said, the longer we go, if this goes 3 months, 6 months, a year, at some point in there, I'm not sure where it is, it becomes much more likely that the two will be found together. But we're not to that point quite yet, I don't think. Now, as far as disappearances that we've covered on Unfound that kind of go in this direction with person and car being missing or still being missing, and you should note that on Unfound, the average age of a disappearance we cover there is over 20 years old. Keep that in mind. Some experience. Audrey Herron. This is a disappearance from New York about 20 years ago. She and her Jeep are still missing. Harry Milligan. This goes back to the 1970s. He and his car are still missing. Donald Irwin. This goes back several years. He and his car are still missing. But as I stated a few minutes ago, we have not covered a ton of disappearances on Unfound where the person in the car are missing for a long period of time. Usually what happens is a car is found abandoned, and it very well may be that somebody else put it there. Certainly possible. But the more common scenario is the car is found somewhere and the person is still missing to this day. 10 years later, 20 years later, 40 years later. Like we go back to like Milda McQuillan, who went missing, and I think it was Minnesota, where her car was eventually found and abandoned on like a logging road. That disappearance, I think at this point, is like 45 years old. The car was found. She's never been found, although some people believe that foul play might have occurred there. Now, we have had some where the disappearances of the person and the car have partially been solved. One of those is Esther Westenbarger from Kokomo, Indiana. She only had a mile and a half to drive from a bar that she was at to her home. She and her car went missing. Not quite 10 years later, her car and she were found in a retention pond. And it turns out that it seems either she didn't know where she was going, she was drinking and driving, she had some sort of medical event like a heart attack or stroke or something, or she fell asleep at the wheel. She went right through the T intersection. So she came up to a T where she needed to make a right or a left. She went right through it, through this grass, into this retention pond, and she drowned in her car. And it was just completely by luck that she and the car were found. Many years like almost 10 years later after she went missing. And then Eric Franks is a unique situation where several years after he went missing, his car was completely found in one piece after it had been auctioned off, and there's certainly foul play in his disappearance. He's still missing. If you'd like to know more about his disappearance, just find it, that episode on iTunes or on Spotify or even on this YouTube channel. Go to the Eric Franks episode to hear my interview with his mother from some years ago. That was before his car was actually found. To hear more of the details of why probably his ex-girlfriend, Kendra, is responsible for his disappearance and for the hiding of the car for several years. And then finally, when is a connection a connection? This is learning point number 3. So here is the surprise, and I'm going to be looking off to my left to read this article to you. The former business partner of 2 Belmont County residents who were murdered in their home is missing from Oklahoma. This article is written, by the way, in Ohio. The Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma Sheriff's Office is asking for the public's help in the search for Andrew Isaac Griffin. He was reported missing Friday after leaving a relative's home to report to work in Texas, as I've already detailed here. And this is another article, I think, from early July. Well, Lisa Strussin Ballog, B-A-L-L-O-G, sister of the late Thomas Strussin, confirmed Tuesday, this is going back to July once again, Tuesday in July of 2023, that Andrew Griffin was a partner in the Elm Grove Salsa Joe's restaurant business. But Thomas and Angela Strushin were found dead inside their home on Trails End Drive in Belmont, Ohio. And remember, Andrew disappeared from Oklahoma. These two people were found dead inside their home in Ohio, after a fire was reported there on September 21st of 2021. So this happens in September of 2021. Andrew goes missing in late June of 2023, but they were in business together. And days later, Belmont County Sheriff David Lucas announced their deaths. So once again, going back to Thomas and Angela Strushin, their bodies were found in this fire, and they had not died due to the fire. They actually died, it was a double homicide, and it seems somebody lit their house on fire to cover it up. And if you go find their house, beautiful house. At the time, Lucas said Tom Strushin was 52 years old and the owner of two local Salsa Joe's restaurants, one east of Morristown, Ohio, and the other one in Wheeling, West Virginia. West Virginia goes up and borders on Ohio for a little bit. Angela Strussin was 49 years old, the sheriff in Ohio said. It is unclear whether Griffin was last seen on Thursday or Friday. The Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office posted information about Griffin on its Facebook page. The post states, Andrew Isaac Griffin, this is information that I already read. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, otherwise known as NamUs, describes Griffin as a 30-year-old white man, 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighing approximately 200 pounds. He goes by the nickname Drew, and he has short brown hair, blue eyes, and a red beard. He also has a scar on his next to his right eye on the cheekbone from a childhood accident. Less than a week after Strussin's murders, Lucas announced the arrests of 31-year-old Anthony Michael DeBacco and 25-year-old Miana Malin Smith, both of Guernsey Street in Bel Air, Ohio. So all this is happening in Ohio. Andrew goes missing in Oklahoma, but somehow Andrew was connected to these two people who were murdered through a business, through these two restaurants. The two suspects were charged with extortion after detectives investigating the homicides linked them to an alleged plot to extort Thomas Strushin. Both eventually pled guilty, and each were sentenced to 3 years in prison. So they're still in prison now, so I guess they cannot be responsible for Andrew's disappearance. Smith and DeBacco reportedly had threatened to reveal that Strushin had an affair with Smith. So Mr. Strushin had an affair with Miana Smith. Assistant prosecutor Chris Gagan said Strushin paid them a total of $25,000 to conceal that information. According to Gagan, the extortion was treated as an entirely separate crime that was unrelated to the murders. In February of 2022, so approximately a year and a half ago, he said DeBacco and Smith had, at this point in time, been eliminated as suspects in the murder. So they were extorting the Strushins, but at least at that time, a year and a half ago, local law enforcement were saying they did not have anything to do with the fire and the murders. Very interesting. Neither Belmont County, Ohio Sheriff David Lucas nor Chief Deputy James Zusak, also in Ohio, could be reached for comment on the status of the double homicide investigation late Tuesday. So this is going back to this article written in early July of 2023. So the Strushins are in this business with Andrew Griffin. Their house burns down. They go out there. They find that the two of them had been murdered in their house before it was burned. These two other people were charged with extorting the Strushins. Those people are now in jail. But now here in June of 2023, Andrew Griffin goes missing, who is in business with the Strushans. I know it's a little complex, but it has to be brought up. So some important points, though. Important. DeBacco and Smith have not been charged with the murders of the Strushans, Strussion. It's their last name. Have not been charged with their murders at this time in September of 2023. Important other point to remember is Thomas Strushan had paid them. So if you're thinking that DeBacco and Smith killed the Strushans, would they kill somebody who was actually paying them? Something to think about. And that all happened, importantly, in 2021, whereas Andrew did not disappear till June of this year of 2023. So what's unclear, though, still a lot of cloudiness to this. How did Andrew Griffin, who's in Oklahoma, seems like he grew up in Oklahoma, he has family in Oklahoma, how did he even know the Strushans in Ohio? It's unclear. We don't know. Not to mention the Strushans were much older than Andrew, so it's not like he went to high school with them and then they ended up moving to Ohio or something. The Strushans were late 40s, early 50s. Andrew was 30 years old. It's unclear how these people knew each other at all. And one restaurant was in Ohio. The other one was in West Virginia. There were no restaurants in this business in Oklahoma at all. And what's also unclear is, were there other business partners besides Andrew and the Strushans? Haven't been able to find that information anywhere either. I think this is all important to look at this fairly. So the big question, once again, when is a connection a connection? Is there something here? Could it be that the murders of the Strushans have something to do with Andrew Griffin's disappearance? Does Andrew's disappearance have something to do with the murders? Is it one or the other? Which way is this all working? Now, my experience, we've kind of touched upon this in many episodes of Unfound. I'm just going to read a few to you. Joshua Guimond went missing from St. John's University in Minnesota. A lot of people believe that he went missing due to sexual abuse that was happening on that campus for many, many years. Tom Brown from Canadian Texas. There's still many people believe that the sheriff, Nathan Lewis, and maybe some of his deputies were responsible for Tom Brown's disappearance and now death. We now know that Tom Brown is deceased. Tony Schwark, back in the 1980s, could his disappearance out there in the Atlantic Ocean, going out there with a friend of his, be connected to some sort of huge drug running operation? And then Megan Lancaster, could her disappearance in Ohio be connected to her connections to the chief of police, a lawyer who was going to be brought up on charges of running a prostitution ring, etc., but he died. Mike Moran died before he could stand trial. Is her disappearance connected to all of that in some way? It's unclear. I will tell you that I doubt all of that, but that's me. You're free to think what you want on this, but usually I doubt such things, and really I have to tell you, I learned a hard lesson with the disappearance of Tom Brown regarding this whole topic of a disappearance being connected in some huge conspiracy or something. I will tell you, it's best to shy away from that stuff. And I think, at least at this point, that's kind of the way I'm leaning with Andrew Griffin's disappearance. Does his disappearance have anything to do with the Strushans being murdered? I think it's very unclear. The problem is there's still a lot of unknowns as far as the public information goes. We don't have any phone records. Did he talk to anybody or text anybody that day of his disappearance other than talking to his boss? We don't have any ping info. When he said he was going over that river, was it the Red River? Was he anywhere near river? We don't know. The issue I have, though, is what are the odds that just at the point that he was talking to his boss that he happened to be driving over a river? It seems unlikely. It seems to be a little too quaint, a little too fine, a little too tidy, in my experience, having covered over 300 disappearances, but certainly could have happened. He had to drive over a river at some point, but we also know that most of that trip, he's not crossing rivers at all. So how is it, just at the moment he's talking to his boss, that he was going over a river? He never did say what river. We don't know much about the job. We don't know how far ahead it was scheduled for him to be in Texas. We need to know more about Andrew the person. Was he married? Children? Addictions? None of that has been written anywhere. This is important. How did he come to know the Strushans? How did he react to their house being burned and all of this coming out about the murders and the extortion? How did Andrew react to all of that? We don't know. And dare I say, and this is just the way I have to look at these things as a reporter, is it possible that Andrew was in Ohio at the time of the Strushans' house burning and them being murdered? I think you have to look at that. Just have to. Just get it out of the way. I'm hoping he was in California, had nothing to do with their deaths at all. But if there is proof that he was in Ohio just when this happened to happen, we've got to start taking a serious look at that, surely. My perception of this entire disappearance is probably the resolution is not going to be a good one. As I stated earlier, you start person and truck go missing. The truck is still missing a couple months later. We're slowly getting to that point where the chances of Andrew being alive are really, really slim. And you may say, well, he was running off to start a new life. It had nothing to do with the Strushans murder. It had nothing to do with the business. He was just sick of everything. He's moving to Hawaii. Very possible. Then what are we saying? He stole the truck because the truck hasn't been found? You see what I mean on that. So that's as far as my analysis can go at this point. There's just too many unknowns. If the Griffin family is out there, I'd be happy to talk to them, give them additional insight. If they're willing to give me more information, I'm willing to keep it off the record, to give them some of my insight, to try to figure out what happened to Andrew. I would be happy to do that. So they can reach me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. And that ends this episode of Unfound Now, the disappearance of Andrew Griffin, June 30th, 2023, allegedly, seemingly, apparently driving from Shawnee, Oklahoma to Odessa, Texas. Thanks for watching.